This podcast may not be suitable for young listeners.
Steve Lilly, Journal Entry Number 10, Squatch Operators. I squeezed into the hollow trunk of a big oak, making myself real small. Something was moving out front. A shallow draw in front of me with water reflected the only light available in the universe. Ripples gave away my stalker. It was either a small animal or a monster creeping toward me. I wouldn't know until I activated my NVGs, which were cocked upward on my head. I didn't want to move just yet. The mosquitoes were eating me alive. The illusion of a distant hum of an outboard motor was in my ear. It's enough to drive a man insane. You can't swat them away, they just come back. I couldn't move a muscle. Danger was close. The night shift of forest animals were coming home to a well-deserved day's sleep. A family of raccoons lived in the top of this tree, and I was blocking their front door. Raccoons are innovative creatures, and they never live in a place without a back door or a place to escape in an emergency. They were bypassing the smelly human in the front vestibule, climbing in from the outside. Their claws in the bark gave them away. I started this op alone. It wasn't supposed to be an op, just a scouting trip to see if it was worth coming. Do they have squatches? That question must be answered before we commit to expend resources and time. If the office says squatchers are there, we go. They haven't let us down yet. But this is different. It's a freelance job that could provide us with a double payday. But the landowner isn't sure what's causing the problems. In his email, he wrote that heavy equipment had been damaged and they found big human-like tracks. Those two bits of information were worth the hour-and-a-half drive down here to take a peek. The email was sent to my buddy Cam Buckner, and it was forwarded to me. I asked Cam if he wanted to join me since he instigated the project. Well, he said he was too fat and out of shape. He couldn't keep up with me and my crew. Well, I had to invite him, but I'm happy he backed away. He is fat and he is out of shape, and he would have slowed me down. And there's no way his fat ass and I both could fit into this tree trunk. I had to get in here quick, and old Cam, he'd be wandering around looking for a chair to sit in. Y'all please don't tell him I said these things. He's not a sensitive guy, and he can take a joke. But you never know for sure. And I'm actually not joking. That boy's got to stop eating that Bluebell ice cream. After corresponding with the writer and getting his phone number, I called him and he explained everything. I was happy that he was not one of the Bigfoot crazies who thinks every twig break is a squatch. He was a reasonable man, and this is what he told me. He needed land to build an underground shelter. He's a prepper. These guys are serious about their prepping for a disaster of any kind, especially the ones who have money. After looking over the land available in his county, first through real estate agents and then anyone who might have heard that a chunk of ground was for sale, he landed on a 200-acre tract of timber in the most remote and hard-to-get-to locations close to where he lived. The clerk at the county seat said the land was about to be declared abandoned, and if the back taxes weren't brought up to date, it would auction in the coming months. The papers had been filed by the tax assessor's office to claim the land. The owner was Jeremiah Trice. Mr. Bright, the man who I was dealing with, had the initial impulse to get with Jeremiah Trice, make him an offer, and buy the land before he had to compete with others at an auction. But Mr. Trice had died several years ago, and the property was now owned by his twin daughters, Priscilla and Quilla. But no one had seen them since their daddy died. The months passed, and Mr. Bright won the auction and now owned the land. He was waiting on documents to make it official, but he didn't care. The check had cleared, and he was sure the wheels were turning, so he began construction on his underground shelter. He probably shouldn't have started work so soon, but he did, and here we are. Within a week of starting excavation work, the contractor began reporting vandalism on his heavy equipment. It got worse every few days. Soon they began finding dead animals hung on their damaged machinery. That caused two of his men to leave the site, claiming there was some sort of voodoo going on. Mr. Bright expected the contractor to continue work and report the vandalism to the police and his insurance company, which he did. Law enforcement suggested that he hire night security to stay with the equipment during the dark hours. There was a dispute regarding who paid for the extra expense of night security, but it was settled that Mr. Bright was responsible. Instead of hiring a real security company, Mr. Bright, always a frugal spender, hired 2 Emmets from town, a couple of men who did odd jobs for him. According to Mr. Bright, these men weren't the sharpest pencils in the drawer, but they would do. After all, he only needed someone there to dissuade the vandals from slowing the work. The men were not armed. They were to stay from dusk till dawn and just be there, visible to anyone who drove onto the site. And that is what they did for 3 nights. On the 4th morning, the 2 men were found dead, a short distance from their car. Their bodies had been pummeled with an object, according to the investigators, but the object was never found. Before leaving, after an all-day search of the area, one of the deputies walked into the porta-john to relieve himself, and he saw an envelope pinned to the door. Mr. Bright's name was written on the plain cover. The letter enclosed was a warning from Priscilla and Quilla, stating that they had been the vandals and the murderers of the night watchman, and that if Mr. Bright wanted to live, he would leave their property and never return. If he stayed, they would eventually kill him. Since no one had seen the twins since Mr. Trice left this earth, the lawmen were skeptical that the girls, who would have been in their mid-30s by now, would have or could have done all the damage and committed the murders. But if they could be found, they would be questioned. But nobody knew how to find them. The site had been trampled throughout the day, with a team of deputies scouring the ground for clues. In all those hours of looking straight down at the ground, 8 men had missed the strangest part of the evidence, except one man. He was a heavy equipment diesel mechanic who had been there all day replacing hydraulic hoses that had been cut by the perpetrators. He never spoke up until everyone was heading to their vehicles to leave. Several cars were running and some had left. There was a dust cloud hovering over the site. The sheriff, 1 deputy, and Mr. Bright were the men left, and they were all headed to their cars. "Did y'all not think those tracks were odd? Never seen tracks like that," the mechanic said. He spit a long stream of tobacco in the dirt. Mr. Bright barely heard the man, but he turned. "What tracks?" "There's a half a dozen right there by your truck," the man said. "The hell you say?" Mr. Bright said, looking straight down. He was straddling one where he stood. Between his boots was a perfect human-looking barefoot track in the dust 6 times the size of a human foot impression. "Sheriff, come over here," Mr. Bright said. "What do you make of this?" The sheriff and his deputy studied the impression and then went on to find several more. After a short discussion among just the 2 of them, they walked back to Mr. Bright and the mechanic. It was their opinion the tracks were made from slip-on prosthetics. The vandals and the murderers must have warned them to throw the investigation in a direction they were not going to pursue. "They're trying to make us think it's Bigfoot that did this," said the sheriff. I suppose it's a smart move because one thing we haven't seen are human tracks anywhere, and I think they strapped those things on and did their work and then they left. Mr. Bright said that he stared at the sheriff in disbelief for a long time, but he couldn't say anything. He had been walking around all day with those men, and he never noticed any of those tracks. He guessed that they were looking for a murder weapon and never had tracks on their mind. Whatever the reason, no one saw them except the mechanic. They agreed to keep in touch if new evidence emerged. The contractor left the job with his equipment the next day, except for a dump truck that they thought was beyond repair. The project was now dead, like the night watchman, and Mr. Bright didn't know what to do, so he sent Cam an email, and here we are. Mr. Bright says he thinks the culprits are squatches. I've seen one before, he told me. Well, I sat in silence as he continued talking. I think I was distracted, getting an almost confirmation that we had squatches on his land. But who wrote that note? It wasn't a squatch. That's the dumbest animal on the planet. They can't even seem to figure out that water will wash squat shit out of their hair. There's no way they wrote that letter. No, it's a human, I thought, but who? And why am I down here in this poor country? There are squatches here. That's the answer. We don't know how many, and we don't know how the people involved are working with these creatures. I wanted to come down and spend a few hours looking around to see if it was worth bringing my team. And when Mr. Bright threw me a number he was willing to pay to resolve this problem, it became worth staying a while longer. It would almost double our pay depending on how many squatches we could take. The trip had turned from a curiosity to a sure thing, but I had to see it for myself. 2 more raccoons climbed the outside of the tree, and it sounded like one was coming down to investigate the intruder, me. I didn't want to fight with a raccoon. They're a vicious little critter, and I was hoping he'd go back up and not bother me. Before I left for this place, I had called Lewis and Hook asking if they wanted to come with me, and since this was only an intel gathering trip, they declined. Lewis had a party happening at his trailer that night. Lewis always had a crowd at his pad. I walked down there once hoping to meet some of his friends a few weeks ago, and I felt out of place and I left. Now, no one was rude to me. Maybe I don't relate well with others. Maybe I'm a loner. I don't feel comfortable in crowds. Hook was in a feud with his old lady. Well, there's nothing new there. Hook and I grew up together, and I don't remember him ever staying with a woman longer than 3 months, ever. He was on number 3 for the year, and I'm not sure what it is about him that draws the controversial type, but his life is filled with angry women. He falls in love with every one of them, and he'll hang on with them till the end, which is usually within 2 months of him moving them in. Now I'll say this, he's never with an ugly one. Hook is a tall, lean, handsome fella, and he has no trouble attracting beautiful women. I think he should be a little more patient before he moves the crazy ones in. He says every time there's a breakup that she sure didn't come off that way in the beginning. I guess he has a point. Sometimes people don't show you who they are up front. I'm hoping he draws a good one after this one walks out, but I'm not holding my breath. On the other hand, there might be something he's doing to make them so angry. Maybe they can't fix old Hook. None of my business. I'm only the observer. I met Mr. Bright at a town square cafe this morning. He seems to be as normal as they come and is perplexed by the events of the last 2 weeks at his newly acquired property. I would guess he's 50 years old, give or take a year. He's average height and weight and looks and demeanor. There's nothing unusual about the man. Everything really is average, making the story he told me more believable. I opened the Google Maps on my phone and we pinned the location of the excavation site. and then I asked him to show me the boundaries of his property. 200 acres is a pretty big place. The job site was only in a small area. I'm glad you came, Steve, he said. You know the story. What do you think? I'll just have to take a look, I said. If I find anything, I'll call you. Wait, he said. Don't you need me to drive you out there to show you around? It's better if I go alone. Something has its eye on the area. You've started construction. I need to get in there without alerting whoever this is that anyone is there. Now, I know what to do. Now, don't worry. I hope we can get this resolved for you soon, I said. He paid for my breakfast and we walked into the parking lot. He asked that I follow him to his truck, where he produced an envelope and extended it to me. Well, what's this? I asked. It's half the money, he said. I almost took the cash, but I thought better of it. I didn't know how long this gig would take. I wasn't sure he was dealing with squatches at all, although the chances were high. If it hadn't been for the note they found on the outhouse, I would have been sure it was only squatches, but people were involved with this. And I'd wait until after I reconned the area and assessed the situation before I would take his money. How about we wait on that, Mr. Bright, and I'll call you when I know what we're dealing with, if I can figure it out at all. All right, sounds good, he said, and we parted ways. I opened the pin location on my mobile and I began looking for a way to come onto the property without using the construction entrance. It was a new road that was once an old road used for extracting timber. The trees had not been cut in several years and had not been replanted in pines. Hardwood grew everywhere. The excavators made quick work of the existing pathway, and they laid gravel, and that was the only egress onto the property that had been used since Bright bought the land. I needed to come in on foot from another angle. The property really was in the most remote area of the county, and I wondered how much Bright would pay to get power out there. No one lived within several miles of this place, and the surrounding area was nothing but forest as far as I could swipe the screen out until I saw the town. And I found a way in from the opposite end of the construction entrance, and I'd have to walk across property that didn't belong to Bright. It was early September, and squirrels were the only game in season, but squirrel hunters don't go to these areas. They don't work that hard for a tree rat. I wouldn't run into hunters, and I felt like it was a good plan, so I started my truck and I headed that way. The gravel road ended abruptly, and the map showed that it went on through to the next paved road, but it didn't. A gate blocked the timber egress, meaning that this was probably leased for hunting, and I got out and threw on my pack. With my rifle across my back and my 1911 on my hip, I walked around the gate and I started the walk that would take me twice as long as I had planned while sitting in the diner parking lot. 2 miles in, I cut into the woods on my right. I still had a half mile to go to reach Bright's property line. I felt good, had seen nothing but a few does, and started into the thick leaves. I had to move slower now because the noise I was making. Once I was at a spot I thought defined Bright's property, I stopped and I took a break. The roast beef sandwich I had packed was tasty, and I washed it down with 2 bottles of water. And I sat as still as a mouse for an hour, and I listened. It was now 4 p.m., and I had not heard anything out of place. There was, however, a faint smell of wood smoke in the air. It wasn't thick and heavy, and not all the time. I caught whiffs of it every 10 minutes or so. The wind was cooling the right side of my face, and I moved toward the only evidence of human activity. Only people build fires. By 5:30, I had reached another property boundary. It had taken me that long to move a mile. The leaves were especially dry, and any sound I made would alert anyone in the area that I was there. I wasn't necessarily worried about people, though. Squatches have a unique sense of hearing. They were who I was trying not to alert, and I'm glad I came this way, 'cause I stopped at a big blowdown poplar tree and I sat on the trunk and I waited. Sooner or later, if there was activity in the area, I would see something. Throughout the day, I had not seen any evidence that a human had been in these woods, and I had traveled for miles. There were no deer stands, no beer cans or dump sites. There was no way to make out tracks in the leaves, so I couldn't find any tracks. I felt like I was the only person who had been in here for the last 100 years, except for the smoke. It got stronger the further I moved into the wind. I couldn't see it, but I could smell it, and it was now heavy and strong and close. I sat there and didn't move a muscle, and I watched and I listened. In the midst of the roar of silence in my ears, the faint sound of leaves crunching and limbs cracking subdued the roar. The only part of my body moving were my eyeballs, and before me emerged a squatch, and it was a big one. He had not made me. He was just walking oblivious to everything around him. I sat tight. I could have killed him where I stood, but I didn't want to ruin the area until I knew how many we were dealing with. Once you shoot, the squatches either run like hell away or they run like hell at you. Neither would have worked for us at that moment. This was a recon mission. Assess the situation. Make a plan. Execute the plan. It is the only way to do this for the maximum payday. The problem now was that the squatch was coming right at me. In another 50 yards, I wouldn't have time to react. "Don't move," a whisper from a female voice slid into my ear. "He's going to veer to the left in a few steps. Do not move." Something was poking in my back. I assumed it was the nasty end of a weapon. I never twitched throughout the event. Sure enough, the squatch turned slightly and went to my left and was soon out of view, and then he was out of hearing range. He was walking the track I had taken to get here. "He's gone. Now before you get up, take that rifle off your lap and hand me the safe in. Do not turn your body. I'll shoot you right here and now. Now move slow," said the almost beautiful voice from behind me. Well, I did as she said, and before she could ask, I unbuttoned the 1911 on my right hip, and I pinched the grip with the finger and the thumb and held it above my head, hanging from the trigger guard, to which she removed it from my possession. "Do you have any other weapons?" "I have a knife on my belt and a pistol on my ankle," I said. "Hand them over, real slow like you did the others," she said. Now this woman was so calm that I was never nervous. When someone is going to kill you, they just do it. Not like in the movies where the antagonist gives a big speech giving the captive time to work out a maneuver to overcome him or her. No, in real life they just shoot you and they walk away. And if she was intent on killing me, it would have already happened. Plus, she didn't sound like a killer for what that was worth. Well, I was now fully relieved of my weapons, and she said, "Stand up and turn around." She was as beautiful as she sounded in my ear with that whisper. She was a brunette, no taller than 5.5 feet, slim in the waist and hips, and decked in modern camo, probably military issue. She stood in front of me holding a standard AR-15. She was not nervous at all, and in a way, it endeared me to her. Damn, she looked sexy in that outfit, but I kept my big mouth shut. "Toss your pack over here and sit down on that log," she said, and I did as she commanded. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Steve Lilly, and I've been hired to investigate those things that just walked through here." "Why?" she asked, "and who hired you?" "Mr. Jack Bright. He's been having trouble with vandals on his excavation site. He thinks it could be those creatures," I said. "You've confirmed it. Now what?" she asked. I'm going to kill as many as I can find, I said. I get paid to do that. What are those things? She asked. I've never seen anything like them. They showed up a month ago, and they do a lot of damage to the... And she stopped in the middle of her sentence. Well, now she had me curious. They do a lot of damage to what? I asked. Never mind that. I want you to walk out the way you came in. Just go and we can forget about all this. Now, go on, get moving, she said, moving the barrel of her rifle in that direction. I'm not leaving without my weapons, I said. And you saw that thing. You'd send me down that path defenseless? It's either that or I shoot you, she said. I paused to come up with something to say. I think I was still caught up in those beautiful brown eyes. There was an awkward silence. Go, she said. I'm not leaving without my weapons. Now, you can shoot me, but I don't think you want to. You know I'm not here for you, but you also know you can't trust me. And I think that's where you're going to have to take a leap of faith. It's either that or we stand here all day while you try to figure out how to gather up all those guns and knives on the ground there without me making a move, which I will not do, and then get out of here. Even if I were to walk out without those weapons, that means you have to carry them wherever you're going. Now, why not just lower your rifle and let me carry those things? You're safe. Over her right shoulder, I saw something move. Maybe it moved, and maybe it was the instinct I had developed over many years of squatch hunts. Whatever the reason, I knew something was there, and I zeroed in on it. I'm not sure she noticed my stare. Maybe she thought I was trying not to make eye contact, who knows? But she never said anything about it. It was the face of your typical squatch, obscured by 100 green leaves and twigs, standing in thick brush only a few yards behind her. If I didn't do something quick, that thing was about to kill both of us. Keep talking to me, I said. What? That's it. Just keep the conversation going, because when it gets quiet, that's when that beast in that brush behind us is going to charge. She had a puzzled look on her face, but this girl was smart. In the depths of her mind, she knew there was something back there. I think it was a natural instinct she possessed. The ball was back in my court. Okay, she said. What now? Just keep talking to me, and I'm going to walk slowly towards you and pick up my rifle like it's just another day in the woods for two people standing around and talking about the weirdest shit you can imagine. Now don't turn around, don't make any movements. They like to observe, and that is their downfall. I've killed 100 of them. I know how they behave. By now I had my rifle in my hands. I was 2 feet in front of her. Damn, this girl was a looker. I could have stood there in those woods and looked into those eyes all day, but we had other things happening. I pulled the charging handle of my AR-10 to see that the brass was there, and I released it slowly, and I slid my finger into the trigger guard. If you shoot me, she said, I ain't gonna shoot you, girl. You're too pretty. Now he's moved a little to my left. You're right. So I'm gonna raise this rifle while you're blocking his vision. They know a little bit about guns, and if you raise a rifle, they will charge. They can cover a lot of ground in a split second, so let's do everything real slow. When I get my rifle free of your legs, I'm going to say the word. I want you to turn around going counterclockwise away from my rifle, and I want you to back me up if this thing doesn't go down quick. Now, do you follow me? My rifle was ready to raise. You ready? I said. Well, I guess. Okay, let's have some fun. There was a brief moment where I caught her facial expression that said clearly, have fun? I snapped my AR up and I gave that fucker 3 rounds in his chest. He was already moving. Before I could snap off another round, she sent 2 5.56 rounds into that squatch's face. It dropped into heat 10 feet in front of her, and then it slid another 2 feet, folding its arms under its torso slightly, and folded it into an inverted V. I could have sworn I heard her yell, "Hell yeah!" "Oh, he looks like a baby sleeping with his butt up in the air," she said. Well, I had to laugh at that one. Not only was she beautiful, but she had a sense of humor, too. "That was some good shooting, girl. Now we need to move," I said. "Gunfire draws 'em in sometimes. Where's your car?" "Well, my four-wheeler is a half-mile that way," she said. "Let's get to it and get out of this area. It's already dark and I need to make a phone call." "You won't make a phone call from here," she said. "No signal. I can take you to your vehicle, though. We'll have to take the long way around." "Well, that sounds good," I said. "By the way, what's your name?" "Quilla Trice. My sister and I own this land." The four-wheeler ride was exciting but uneventful. One of those things could have jumped us at any minute. I had the vinyl of the seat cover sucked up in my butt waiting for it, but the attack never came. We popped out on a gravel road after a furious ride through the woods, and Quilla slowed down at that point. We weren't any safer on gravel than we had been in the woods. I should have told her to keep the hammer down, but I was intoxicated with the smell of her hair. I could have stayed behind her on that four-wheeler all night. The slower she drove, the longer I got to hold on to her waist and take in all that female scent from the back of her neck. It was a chance I was willing to take. "There's my truck," I said, pointing toward the end of the gravel. She stopped at the end of the truck and killed the engine, and I sat there not moving. "Are you going to get off?" she asked. Yeah, I said. "I'm listening for danger." "Get the hell off my bike." I thought she would head off down the road, but she stayed and she helped me get my gear in the back seat. I'm glad I didn't have to ask her to stick with me for a few minutes. I had several questions. Once everything was loaded, I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to tell you everything I know. Then I'm going to ask you some questions." "Not now you aren't," she said. "We're still in the middle of nowhere and it's dark and those monsters are out there. Where are you staying tonight?" "Well, I had no plans," I said. "I was going to get a room in town or head home depending on what I found today. I guess I'll go find a room in town now that we know the area is active." "Look, I don't really want to ride that four-wheeler back to my car now that I know what's out there. The woods give me the creeps at night anyway, and that's when I didn't know about these things. Can you give me a ride to my car? And then you can follow me home and you can stay with us tonight. We live 2 counties away, though. It'll be an hour drive from my car. I'll stash this four-wheeler in the woods and come back here to get it later." I didn't show it, but I was doing a little jig in my head. "Yeah, sure," I said. "That sounds fine if you don't mind a strange man in your house overnight. Even if you were a creep, which I doubt you are, my sister and I can handle ourselves. Now come on, it'll be fine," she said. "You do know I have weapons," I said with a wink. "We do too," she said. I think she meant business. At 10 p.m., I followed Quilla Trice into the driveway of an average-looking house in a small Mississippi town 2 counties away from the town I drove to that morning. Her sister was sitting at the kitchen table when we walked in. She stood and introductions were made. "This is the man I told you about," Quilla said to her sister Priscilla. She had called ahead to warn her sister that she was bringing a new friend home. It was like I had double vision. They were identical in every way. They had the same hairstyle, the same figure, the same posture, and their faces matched. Even their voices and speech had imperceptible differences. Had Priscilla not been wearing yoga pants and a long-sleeved t-shirt, contrasted with her sister's military garb, I would not be able to know which one I was talking to. "How about some coffee? Have a seat," said Priscilla. "Well, that sounds good," I said. "I'm going to change, Steve. I'll be back in a minute," said Quilla, and she walked into the back of the house. "My sister told me what happened today," said Priscilla. She says you saved her life. What are those things that have shown up in my daddy's woods?" "I didn't save her. She may have saved mine," I said. "If she hadn't hit that squatch in the head when she did, both of us would be digesting in a monster's stomach right now. She is a cool hand when the pressure is on." "She is that. She told me you hunt these things. Can you tell me more about them?" "They are a mutant creature that does not belong in the woods of any continent. The foulest creature on earth, if you ask me. They can stay hidden from most of the public, namely because people don't go to the places where they live. But there are thousands of encounters with humans, and most of the time it's a generic auditory or visual sighting, and then it's over. Those are the stories people tell and are soon labeled crazy. It happens a lot, but if they can catch you alone, they will kill you and make a meal out of you. Now that is the broad overview. I could get more into detail, but I'm tired of thinking about them tonight, if you understand." "I understand," said Priscilla. Quilla walked back in the kitchen wearing similar clothing as her sister. She poured a cup and sat down across from me. "Okay, you said you wanted to tell me all that you knew and that you had some questions, so let's hear it," said Quilla. 30 minutes later, they now knew about the land sale and the construction that had begun before the papers were final, the vandalized equipment and the dead animals and the dead night watchman. And finally, they knew about themselves being sought for questioning in both crimes. The story they told me was completely different than the story Jack Bright had relayed to me. Now, I don't think he was lying. I believe he told me what he had been told. Their father, Jeremiah Trice, had inherited the land from his father. Trice was a farmer, and the family owned over 2,000 acres in the county. The land where I had met Quilla was a standalone piece of property not connected to the family farm, and it was purchased 2 generations before for the timber. When Jeremiah Trice died 15 years earlier, the girls were 14 years old. In his wisdom, and after his wife had died unexpectedly, Trice set up a trust so that in the event of his death, the fund and all the property would be kept current in taxes and leased to a large corporate farming outfit until the girls were 21. At that time, the twins could decide what to do with the investments as well as the land. With the advice of good attorneys in Memphis, the twins elected to sell the land to the farming corporation that was now leasing it and invest the money. They weren't interested in keeping the big farm. They weren't farmers, and they had no way to keep the ground prepped for what it was used for. The investments their father had made were solid, so with the minor revisions, they left the cash alone and had been living off interest since they had come of age. Jeremiah Trice had planned well for the girls, and now they were set for life. The part of his estate that went unaddressed was the 200 acres now in question. It had not been recorded in the estate, but the deed to the land remained in Jeremiah Trice's name in the courthouse. It had been moved to a secret file. That is the only way this could have happened. The twins didn't know about the property until a month ago, when a certified letter stating the property was considered abandoned and had been auctioned. Their attorney requested all pertinent documents, and in the file were 6 letters to the twins giving them legal warning of the impending sale if the taxes were not paid, including a final notice. All letters had been signed via certified mail, but were addressed to the farm where they had not lived since their father died. The signatures were not theirs. They had been forged. The attorney was taking steps to challenge the judge's decision to confiscate the property. Lawsuits would be filed on their behalf, hence Mr. Bright had not received the final papers. Had they known they owned the land, the taxes would have been paid through the trust, but the tax bills were never sent to the trustee. Furthermore, they would have kept the taxes current, or they would have sold the land after the trust was dissolved. It wasn't like they didn't have the money. The whole thing had a distinct odor about it, they said. Why would the ownership of an obscure piece of land be hidden from them? County records were kept with great care, rarely misplaced, much less hidden. There had to be a motive, and they wanted to find it. The first step was to see the property for themselves. Well, that was going to be my next question, I said. But before you get to that, tell me about the rifle and the clothes you're wearing when you snuck up on me in the woods today. Now, not many people can do that. Also, the smell of the fire brought me to that place that you sneaked up to me on. Did you build a fire back there? They both laughed at me. They looked at each other, and Priscilla explained. We both spent 4 years in the Army. We were infantry. We never saw combat, but we were trained. We aren't rangers or special ops like most people claim to be in the Army. We were regular infantry. Our training was enough that we could move through the woods like a ninja compared to all the Emmett deer hunters around here. It's basic infantry knowledge, but I think it puts us at an advantage over an enemy without training. Quilla interrupted. I doubt I would have been able to get behind you undetected had you not been locked onto that creature in front of you. He had you distracted, and I saw my chance to find out who you were, and I took it. Well, how did you know that Squatch would turn where he turned? I asked. We have been watching them for the last 2 weeks, she said. We built a hide close to where I caught you. They're such odd creatures that we wanted to see what they were. Sort of an observation post. Basically, we were fascinated with these creatures. Okay, I said. Let's get back on track now. You find out about this land and your first step is to see it. Can you tell me about that? Yes, they both said together. I thought I was hearing it in stereo. Their voices were identical. Before we tell you what happened, you need to know that we know why this land fraud happened. There is a marijuana grow on that property. There's several clear areas to get sun, and every one of those places is thick with marijuana plants. If you had not run into me, you would have walked up on one of those many fields. Now, this is the end of the growing season, and the plants are huge. I don't know if they have harvested the buds. Who knows what the value of this crop is, but it has to be big. Things were beginning to make sense to me now. It would all become clear in the next 30 minutes. They went on to tell me that they drove to the property. Jack Bright had not started his project yet, and there was no road into the area, only old logging roads that had never been maintained. They followed one of those and saw that someone had been using it as a foot trail. They guessed folks were hunting or camping in there. This is until they saw the telltale markers for a path that rang a bell. While in infantry training, they had learned to look for things that were out of place in remote areas, and Priscilla noticed a reflective tack pinned to a tree. 10 yards further, she saw another, and then another further down the trail. She stopped her sister, and they both got quiet. The twins went into combat mode, following the tacks until they walked up on a tripwire connected to a claymore strapped to the base of a tree. The reflective tacks led them around the device. They kept pushing forward, placing each step like it was life or death, which it was. It was quite a distance further, but they walked into a green field filled with the healthy marijuana plants. For the rest of the day, they followed the tacks, finding more patches, some larger and some smaller, but always full of well-cared-for plants. And they never saw a person, which confused them. All this money growing in these fields and no one to look after it. They tend to the plants at night, I said. How do you know that? They asked together. I know a little about how that business works, I said. It's not a people business, and the customer is not always right. You stumbled on a dangerous situation. Now, we can talk about that another time, but I assume you got out safely. We did, they said. It was after dark before we got back to the car, and we never saw anyone. But as we were getting in the car, we heard a claymore go off. It was followed by a roar from several locations in the area. I wanted to see what was up, said Quilla, but my sister insisted that we leave right then. She almost killed us, speeding us out of there. We aren't identical in every way, said Priscilla. Quilla rolled her eyes and grinned at her sister. Quilla is the wild one. I think things through before I jump. One of those squatches tripped the mine and blew himself to hell. You don't happen to know where that corpse is, do you? I asked. I know exactly where it is, said Quilla. All right, then, hold that thought, I said. I'll need to gather something from that site. Well, they looked at each other like I was crazy, but I ignored it. There was a big chunk of change laying in those woods rotting. I wanted every dollar I could get out of it. All right, I'm with you up to this point. Why were you there today, though? I asked. Quilla took a deep breath and looked at her sister. After a pause, she said, Okay, you aren't going to like this, but I've been back there a few times this month. I know I should have told you, but I knew what you would say. I knew you were going back, stupid, but I also know I've never been able to change your mind on anything. You were armed up and could take care of yourself, so I hoped like hell you could. So I never said anything. You always waited until I left for work to go anyway. When would I have been able to object? Well, what's done is done, Quilla said. Now, here is why I went back. It was a guess on her part, but if she only went back during the day, she would be safe, assuming the pot crew only came in at night. It was the roars when the claymore went off that piqued her curiosity. Her plan was to build a hide and observe, nothing else. Within an hour of getting in her makeshift hide, one of the creatures moved through. Before the day was over, she had seen 3 more. At dusk, she moved out. Later that week, she was back in another location, but always close to one of the fields, and this time she set up in line with a safe trail. The creatures were moving through, but avoided the booby traps. They had learned where they were and how to get through the area without getting blown up. Well, she thought this was remarkable, and I told her it didn't surprise me one bit. They were smart in some ways, but real dumb in other ways. On the second trip, she stayed all night and watched the men come in and tend to the crop. They were now removing the buds and transporting the dope out in backpacks. 3 came in, they worked for 4 hours and left with the buds. She assumed they picked the whole field. And one thing she noticed was that the creatures avoided the fields while the men were working. But when they left, the creatures came back, always avoiding the claymores, and then they'd walk in the field and then come straight out. I think they were gathering a few buds left so that they could eat them and get high, she said. A few days lapsed, and she went back to spend the day and a night observing. Upon entering that morning, she heard heavy equipment in the distance, and she made her way there to investigate. Heavy equipment was digging and moving dirt. They had been there a while because it appeared they had made some decent progress. She set up her hide on the field closest to the site, and she just watched. Like clockwork, the creatures came into the field to steal some pot, but it was otherwise uneventful. By that time, the job site had gone quiet. There were 2 hours of daylight left, so she walked over to see what they were building. Before she could walk in, 2 trucks pulled in and parked. Men walked around smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, and by dark they had built a fire and had broken out their own pot and started getting high. She could smell it. The men had gotten back in their trucks and they were asleep, I guess. I had thrown 4 trail cameras in my pack and I wanted to use them, so I crept to the edge of the site and I set one up where it wouldn't be noticed. There was nothing happening there at that point, so I moved back into the field that I was watching that day. It was the same thing again. 4 men, different guys than were at the work site, They came in and they picked the buds and they left with full backpacks. I didn't see any creatures that night. Well, I was bored and I left before dawn, but before I did, I set up the remaining 3 cameras on 3 fields I knew had not been harvested, and by the time there was enough light to see, I walked out and I came home. "Are the cameras still there?" I asked. "Yes, and that's why I was there this morning. If I had gotten them on the cameras harvesting pot, I could send that to our lawyer. I thought he could offer the evidence as to why this whole land deal had happened. But I ran up on you before I ever got a chance to collect the SD cards. And once we killed that squatch, anyone in the area would have known we were there. So I took your advice and I left with you. And that smoke that lured you, the night crew must have built that fire. I guess it was still burning, 'cause I could smell it too." There was one question I had and waited to ask until I heard the whole story. It was time to drop that bomb. "Did you kill the 2 night watchmen?" "Of course I didn't kill the night watchmen," she said. "I didn't know about any murders until you told us tonight. I haven't seen anything about it on the news or the web. It's all news to us, or me." "And the note taped to the outhouse, did you leave that note?" I asked. "I don't know anything about a note," said Quilla. "Okay, I believe you," I said. "Were any of the men who you saw working the crops armed?" "Only one was. He stood by while the others worked. He did carry a pack out, though," she said. "So nobody knows you've been in there looking around, is that right?" "As far as I'm concerned, only you know," she said. "All right, that's good. One last question, Quilla. How many of those creatures would you say are in there?" She thought for a minute, nodding her head in a barely discernible movements as she was counting. She finally said, "I think there's a dozen or more. I saw 10 for sure. 10 unique individual creatures. It amazed me how different they look from each other and how their bodies move in different ways. I have notes in my car, so I was keeping up with them. After each trip there, I made meticulous notes, and I've seen 10, but I heard others whenever one would venture into the field. They acted excited, like they were giddy about getting high that night. So I would be safe saying that there are at least 12 in there, and there could be more." Well, that was music to my ears. This was going to be a big payday. I needed to get my team in motion and on their way. "Thank you for telling me the whole story," I said. "I'm sure it's frustrating having to deal with this." Quilla spoke up. "Not frustrating at all. I've enjoyed the action." Priscilla rolled her eyes. "You can trust what she's saying. She's an action junkie." "Now I have a question for you," said Quilla. "Why are you here?" I didn't have time, nor could I tell them everything. I can inform folks on what I do, and if they spread the news, they get laughed at. But I did my best to make it as simple as I was able. There are 3 of us that make up a team that hunt and kill these things. We get paid to do it. That is basically all I can tell you. Regarding your problem with the land and everything that's happened outside the Squatch problem, I can't help you with that, but I know some people who can. Plus, if the camera angle on the trail cam is wide enough to see what happened that night to the security guards, you are in good shape. You just need to get those SD cards. We can do that for you tonight because I'm going back, and you girls don't need to go back there until this is all sorted out." "I'm going," said Quilla. "Me too," said Priscilla. "All right, well, we can talk about that," I said. "Right now I need to step outside and make a phone call. Then I'm headed back there. I need to go alone, but when we start hunting, you can go. You seem to handle yourself well under pressure, and sometimes we could use the help." "Lewis," I said into the phone. "Lewis!" I had to raise my voice. There was a crowd of people talking in the background at his house. "Hold on, Steve," he said. "Let me step outside." So I waited. "All right, what's up?" said the deep voice of Lewis Shanks. "I gotta send us some money down here, brother. Can you get Hook to quit fighting with his new old lady for a few hours, and you both get down here by dark tonight?" "Where's the job?" said Lewis. "I just sent a pin to your phone. You're only an hour and a half away. Now this is a big one, and I already have a plan coming together in my head." "Why does that not make me feel good about this gig?" Lewis said, laughing. "It's a good one. Trust me. Now call Hook and get down here. Pack heavy and plenty." 10-4, said Lewis. "We'll see you tomorrow." Crawling into the hollow tree trunk was easy. Staying there was the hard part. Raccoons weren't the only animals that live in these places. Bugs do too, and there were several taking a stroll over my body. Some on the outside, and I think I felt a roach make its way under the waistband of my underpants. That is a hell of a thing when moving to squash it will bring the heat down on you. I had been there for 2 hours, and the sun would be up soon, and I needed to get busy. But I had 4 wasted squatches a few yards in front of me, acting exactly like they were high. One of them was grabbing at things in the air that weren't there. 2 were dancing around, playing in the water like kids on a rainy day. Those were the females. The one male kept pawing at them in a rude way, if you know what I mean. It didn't seem to bother them too much, but it was pissing me off. On any other hunt, I would have dropped all 4 of them right there, taken their heads and been on my way home. Quilla had seen a dozen, maybe more in the area, and if I shot now, I'd be leaving money in the woods. I had not slept the night before, and I kept the twins up too late asking questions about when the harvesters came in, when the squatches showed up, and when they left, and I tried to get the best picture in my mind so that I could do what I needed to do. Quilla had only been here a few times. There was no way we could be certain that this was an every-night schedule. Things could change, and they had changed. These squatches were supposed to be here if they followed a pattern, and they were holding me up. But after considering that during the day there was little activity, I began to relax and wait. In reality, we did have a little bit of time. Right now, I was a spectator watching something no one else on the planet gets to see. 4 squatches high on dope having, well, I would suppose you'd call it a squatch party. There was a minute there that a tinge of guilt swept over me for what I would do to these creatures. I mean, they were almost cute, splashing around in the water all screwed up like they were. That shallow wave of guilt went away as fast as it appeared when the male got violent with the females. At some point on their way here, one of the females must have dropped a young squatch off at a tree while she was having her girls' night out. The male left the group when it became obvious that the girls were not receptive to his advances. When he returned, he had a small one in his hand. That poor little soon-to-be terror from hell was being dragged by its leg through the water, squalling the whole way. The party ended with those screams. The big male roared at the baby's mama, and then he began to club her to death with her own offspring. Before it was over, 2 females and the young squatch lay dead in the water. In the calm of the absurd, he shook the only part of the child left in his grip at the remaining female. She knew exactly what he wanted, and if she didn't give it up, she would be laying there with the others. She submitted, and I had to sit as quiet as a mouse while he threw that leg next to the mother and drug the female away. The party was over, and I could not wait to kill this fucker. I was going to punish this one. With the festivities now over, I felt like I could move. And I poked my head out and I looked around and I stepped away from the seclusion of the big oak tree Then I reached in my drawers and I squashed that roach that had been digging around in my crack. He was a big one, and I had to wash my hands off in the water before I did anything else. The roach guts grossed me out. The first order of business was to collect the SD card from the trail cam at the construction site. I would get the remaining 3 as I visited each pot grow. For an hour before dawn until 2 hours after, I walked to every patch of dope I could find. I was moving fast, hoping not to alert the squatches in the area. There have been ops where they have lookouts to warn the pack that humans are in the area, but I never saw one. Maybe they were all sleeping off the activities of the night before. When everything was set, I ran all the way to my vehicle and I left. It took me an hour to get back to the twins' house. Hook's SUV was parked at the curb. Knocking on the front door produced nothing. I knocked once and I rang the bell. It was the door we walked in last night, so I knew this was the entrance that got used the most. The door was unlocked, but I didn't know these people that well to just walk in uninvited, so I walked to the garage, which was open. Both cars belonged to the girls, were parked inside, and I knocked on that door. Still, I got no answer. Then I heard Lewis's big laugh from the backyard. I let myself in the gate, and there sat my brothers with the twins, eating on a massive spread of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy, and a stack of waffles. "Damn, make yourselves at home," I said to the Squatch killers. "Come sit down, Steve. There's plenty left, and it's still warm," said Quilla. "Steve, these women can cook," said Lewis. "Try the waffles," said Hook. "It's better than IHOP." I dug in and I ate. I was hungry and I was tired. Priscilla was laughing as I shoved a wad of eggs in my mouth. I looked up and she was pitching small pieces of bacon at Hook. He was catching every piece in his mouth and giggling at her. "Oh shit," I said, looking at Lewis while I pointed my thumb at Hook. "Don't say nothing to me about this. You know how he is, and I've already warned this nice lady about this maniac. Apparently she's hard-headed," said Lewis, shaking his head. "Hook, how long have you been here?" I said. Well, he didn't acknowledge me. Hook was zeroed in on Priscilla and her animal training technique with the bacon toss. She threw another and he caught it and then made a puppy sound. "Y'all are making me sick," I said, and I got up and took my plate inside. Lewis and Quilla followed me, and I looked out the window after I was settled over my plate at the table. Hook was now tossing Priscilla pieces of biscuit coated in gravy. She'd miss and get gravy on her face, at which time he would scoot his chair closer and wipe her mouth with his napkin. "Can you close those blinds?" I asked Quilla. "I'm about to vomit." Lewis spoke. "Steve, you know how he is. You've seen this a dozen times." "Yeah, but I didn't think." I let the sentence die before it left my mouth. "Forget them," said Lewis. "Give us a sit rep. The girls said they didn't know why you went to the woods." "Right now, Lewis, I need some sleep if I'm going to be any good tonight. Now let me get 3 hours of couch time and I'll run it by you all when I wake up. Romeo is being house-trained on the patio at the moment, and I don't want to go over this twice. I'm out of gas, brother." "Lewis, you guys can hang out here all day if you want," said Quilla. "While Steve is sleeping, I can tell you what's happened on my end. At least you'll have that information, and Steve won't have to retell all that. We have Netflix and other TV if you want to rest up until we leave later." "Well, that'll be fine, Quilla," said Lewis. "Did you say we?" "She's going with us. She knows the layout of the place. She already has hides built in 3 locations, Lewis. She's good with a rifle and she can handle herself," I said. "Plus, she won't listen to me. She'll be your backup tonight while we go to work on this pack of squatches." Quilla reached over and punched Lewis in the arm. "I've got your back, Lewis. I won't let those big old mean squatches get you." "Okay, Quilla," said Lewis. He looked at me and asked, "What does she know?" "She knows enough to do this," I said. Now enjoy your Netflix. I'm crawling on that couch if that's okay with you, Quilla. We have 2 spare bedrooms, Steve. Go to the first door on the left, just down the hall. There's a bathroom if you need to shower, she said. Well, I thanked her and I left the kitchen. After a hot shower, I collapsed onto the clean sheets. I could hear Hook and Priscilla giggling through the wall. With a pillow wrapped around my head, I finally drifted off to sleep. You don't think we hurt Hook's feelings, do you? Quilla asked. Don't worry about Hook, Lewis said. He's bulletproof. It was 5 p.m. and we were halfway to the property. When I left the front door earlier, everyone was already outside waiting on me. I had a quick bagel, and that was all I needed to add some energy to this machine. Hook was in the driver's seat of his big excursion with Priscilla next to him. Get in, we're burning daylight, Hook yelled. I walked straight to my truck. I ain't riding with them, I said. I'm riding with you, Steve, said Quilla. Lewis was right behind her. On the way, I explained my plan. Lewis thought it was good. We would give Hook his instructions when we got there, and below my hand in the console was a small plastic box that contained the SD cards I had removed from the trail cam set out by Quilla, and I handed it to her in the back seat. I've looked at this card from the site, Quilla. I haven't had time to look at the others, but I know what they'll show. This should clear you regarding the murder of the night watchman. And by the way, there were 4 of them there. Looks like those boys brought some buddies along. 2 were killed and 2 were dragged away by the Squatches. I never saw any sign of them while I was there this morning. I doubt they'll ever be found unless someone stumbles on them by chance. Anyway, it's all there on the card. That was a damn good move setting those out, Quilla. Are you saying the creatures killed these men? She said. It's not fun to watch, but yeah, they killed them. You'll also see who penned the note on the outhouse. It may surprise you. Either way, I suggest you make a few copies before you decide what to do with this information. I can't help you with any of that. Your attorney will be helpful, I'm sure. Our focus is on the creatures infesting your land. I have never asked, and I have been assuming we have your permission to kill these things, I said. You assumed right, Steve, she said. One of those things tried to kill me, remember? By the way, I will need you to show me where the creature is that was killed by that claymore when this is all over. I'll need that one and the 3 I saw killed by one of their own yesterday. I have those heads stashed. We get paid by the head count. It's sort of a bounty. They kill their own? She asked. Believe me when I say it is not an easy life being a female Squatch. It is a vicious world they live in. I watched Quilla give me a thumbs up in the rearview mirror. We pulled to a stop and got out and started prepping our gear. Hook pulled in 10 minutes later. He and Priscilla joined us. I spent the next few minutes explaining to Hook, Don Juan Johnson, my plan. For the first time on this op, I brought up the sat image of the property on the laptop. Before I left yesterday, I had pinned locations for the claymores I had found. Each man would have a handheld device to navigate, and the pins had been transferred to those devices. Beside each pin were symbols showing everyone how to avoid the mines. We had an additional problem. The crew watching over the marijuana grow had been coming in each night to harvest buds. We didn't want any human casualties if we could help it. More than likely, the crews worked for an organized outfit, and if their people were killed, they would find us. We didn't want to get crossways with the local cartel. Hook had the most experience with these types, so I sent him to the small trail they used to come in and out of the area. If they showed up, he would intercept them before the shooting started. I wasn't sure how he would make them understand, but like with the ladies, Hook had a way about him that convinced people to see things his way. He is diplomatic, but he is also a savage when he needs to be. Hook and Priscilla headed for his vehicle, and I stopped him. "What are you going to do with her?" I asked. Well, Priscilla heard me, and she pointed her finger my way. "Don't you worry about me and Hook, Steve Lilly. You keep my sister safe. I think I'm in good hands." And she walked off with her arm under Hook's elbow, swishing her fanny as she went. She turned back once to wink and throw me a thumbs up. From the rear of the SUV, she extracted one of Hook's AR-10s, pinned it to her vest, and pulled the charging handle. She was ready to rock and roll. If this relationship materializes, they can tell their kids their first date was on a squatch hunt in a cartel dope field. Now that's just weird, I thought. On the screen, I saw several squatches. They were moving toward the fields, but it would be a while before they made it there. After a comms check, I relayed that intel to Hook. He was now fully up to date. I showed Lewis where I thought he would have the most luck and then told him to take Quilla. They would be Team 2. "Who is Team 1? Asked Lewis. "You want to be Team 1, I said. "What are you, Steve?" "Whatever team you're not." "How about Hook? What team is he?" Lewis asked, sort of grinning by this point. "Kiss my ass, Lewis." I finally caught on to the joke. "I'm Team 1. You and Quilla are Team 2. Hook and Priscilla are Team 3. I said all this with my mic engaged. "Did you copy that, Hook?" "Team 3, copy that. How about you quit talking and let's get in the woods? We get the plan. Let's take some of these fuckers out," said Hook. "Let me know if the pot growers show up," I said. We split up and headed to our positions. It would take an hour for everyone to get set up. I was now using a handheld device to take the shortest distance to the field that I would cover. There were 3 squatches showing bright green on my screen between me and my destination. I would have to move fast and possibly take them on if they figured out I was there. I was hoping they had the skunk weed on their mind and they wouldn't notice me. I was right. They were there and they were sitting still. These bastards had learned when the field hands showed up. They were sitting back and waiting for the humans to come and go. My guess was they had remained hidden from the growers. When a squatch reveals himself to a human, more times than not, the areas get more human traffic, mainly from the goofy researcher types. If they stay hidden, they get to live in peace. I don't think the dope growers even knew the area was covered up with these nasty creatures. With them remaining static, I was able to thread through them like a ninja and set up on my field. I found the hide Quilla had built and I crawled inside. I drained 2 bottles of water, ate a box of raisins and checked my gear, and I waited. This hunt would be one to go in the books. It would be dangerous, but it would be epic. I hoped the dope growers wouldn't show up. They had probably harvested all of their product and there would be no reason for them to come back. That hope was dashed when Hook called in that 4 vehicles were approaching his location. And here's the way he later told me how that went. He parked his big green Excursion crossways in the road. It's the road they use to get close to the property, and he stood in front of the vehicle. Priscilla had been sent into the woods as a backup should there be any misunderstandings if things got out of hand. Hook and Priscilla were lucky. This crew was coming in for a 1 long night job of cutting plants down and stashing them in the woods. I learned from Hook later that that's what they'll do on these large-scale grows so that the fields won't be discovered by hunters or winter campers. This way they can treat the soil in the spring and begin their grow again for the next summer. Since this was the demolition crew and not the team that guarded the fields, they were not armed. There was nothing left to protect. Hook says it took him some time for the first 2 to get out of the cars to talk to him. He wasn't going to approach their car with his rifle in his hands. When the 2 in the first car approached, Hook told them that they needed to postpone their work until the next night. They were curious why this monster of a man they had never seen was telling them to get lost. They said they had been hired to do the job and they wouldn't be paid until it was complete. They needed to make a phone call, they said, before they could agree to this, but Hook persuaded them with a small envelope packed with $100 bills. The possibility of an altercation diminished by several notches at that point. Take this and give us the area for the night. Come back tomorrow and do your thing. That's all I'm asking, Hook said to the 8 men and 1 woman who were all standing in front of him by then. 2 of them held rifles. "Hey, are you a cop?" one of the men asked. It was an understandable assumption the man made. Hook stood there in jeans and weathered boots and a black t-shirt and a ball cap with a long ponytail hanging out from underneath. His arms were covered in tattoos and the man was in shape. He actually looked like someone who might be undercover in one of the federal agencies. But when he turned his back on them, they saw the full patch and rockers displayed by the motorcycle club in which Hook belonged on his vest. They all gave a sigh of relief. In their minds, Hook was another criminal who just happened to be a full member of the most feared motorcycle club in the South. Had they wanted to take Hook out, the outcome would have been questionable to begin with. Maybe they could get the draw on him, and maybe not. With the knowledge just revealed to them, if they did take him down, they would then face the full vengeance of the motorcycle club. It might not be tomorrow, might not be next week or even the next month, but it would come. Take the cash as a token of our appreciation. There is no need to even tell whoever hired you. Just come back tomorrow and finish. No one will ever know the difference. We have no interest in your crop. This is about something else, do you understand? Hook said to them with a not-so-genuine smile. They all nodded, and they took the money, and they got back in their cars, and they left. When they had gone, Priscilla joined Hook at the end of that road, and she kissed his cheek. "You're a good negotiator. I would have taken out every one of them if they had twitched," she said. "Aw," Hook said, "those guys are just trying to get by. I'm glad you didn't have to show me your wicked side." "Oh, I do have one, you know. I hope I never have to show it to you," Priscilla said. She wasn't smiling, and Hook took a hard swallow. "Let's get moving," he said. "The show should start in the next hour or 2. They walked to their assigned position, and Hook explained how to and where to shoot the creatures when it all started, where the kill shot was, and now she was smiling. "While I did my thing that morning, I had found 18 claymores. I thought there might be more, but we weren't going to travel in any direction we had not already been if we could avoid it. If there were more and we had to move in an unknown area, we would have to do it slow and deliberate, which would not be good in a crisis. I wondered where and how this outfit had acquired claymores. Now, we had a few, but those were furnished by our employer. We had never needed to use them. Claymores weren't for sale at Walmart or the Army surplus store. Whoever these fields belonged to had deep connections to have this type of security protecting their crop. Furthermore, claymores are designed to be set off with a remote trigger. A man has to manually activate them with a handheld plunger. They do not come rigged with a tripwire detonation mechanism. Someone had rigged these to do what the mines were not designed to do, and I wondered if Agent Blue could look into this for us if there was any blowback on this op. Maybe there was intel floating around one of the bureaucracies as to who may have sold or bought the weapons. I suppose the mines could have been bought out of the country from an illegal arms dealer. The logistics of getting them in the country undetected were a nightmare, though. But so was growing and selling dope. It was all part of the risk, and apparently these people were willing to take huge risks to grow this stuff. I had been sitting still for 3 hours when the first mine went off. It was in the field where Lewis and Quilla were set up. The radio chatter was brief and to the point. Lewis chimed in. All right, here we go. Let the minds do our work for us, I said. Try not to give your position away before you have to. There's a bunch of these things in here. Copy that, I heard from both teams. 2 more thuds came from Hook's field. Damn, these mines are vicious, said Hook over the comms. We just saw a big male come in and he's down with 1 mine. We gotta start using these, Steve. How many does Lewis have in his stash? I have 4, said Lewis. Make a note to get more, said Hook. This is awesome. This pack of Squatches had gotten so used to the locations of the mines that they never thought twice about following the exact trails into the fields that they had been using since they migrated to this area. Even as their mates were being ripped to shreds, they just kept coming. They are creatures of habit, and they are easy to fool. I had spent the whole morning slightly moving the reflective tacks in the trees and moving the tripwires attached to each mine to the opposite side of the tree. I was apprehensive about even touching the damn things, but I knew someone would come in at some point and collect those. That meant they had to have a mechanism to disarm them. I took a huge risk and found an arming switch on the back of the canisters. If I had not found those, I wouldn't have touched them. But as luck would have it, it all worked out, and now bombs were going off all around us, and with each explosion I whispered, cha-ching. I counted 14 explosions in 30 minutes. While it was happening, I heard squat screams and cries. I heard them running in all directions around me and toward me and away from me. No matter how hard they tried to escape, the habitual travel all summer long had conditioned them to head straight for the flying ball bearings propelled by the C4 explosives. And then everything went silent. We waited 30 more minutes while we watched our devices. How many do you all count on the ground? I said through my mic, and then I waited. 2 minutes clicked off. I count 10 down and 4 running, said Lewis. I heard him say, and then to Quilla, here he comes, now. Rifle fire ripped into the night from Lewis's location. I sat tight and waited. Make that 11, Lewis said. This girl is steady under pressure. I don't think it knew we were here, but he was charging our direction all the same. She dropped him like a sack of quickcrete, Steve. Oh, she's a killer, I said. How many do you count, Hook? Hook didn't answer. I heard 2 rifles expend several rounds in his direction. I looked back at my device and 2 more lay behind their hide, and Priscilla was getting out to look at them. Make it 13, Steve, said Hook. He sounded a bit shaken. I heard him tell her, get back in the damn blind, Priscilla. You okay, brother? I asked. Yeah, thanks to this girl. I was busy watching the field, and she had my 6. They were on us before I knew it. They must have been slow creeping up behind us, and she took them both down. I helped with the one still moving. Other than that, I'm good. That left 1, and I could see him on my device. 50 yards away from me, and he was moving in. After crawling quickly out of my hide, I stood straight up, and I flipped down my NVGs. There he was on hands and feet, doing that creepy-ass spider crawl they do. I looked close at his face, and guess who was coming to pay me a visit? It was that asshole that beat the mother to death with her own offspring. Well, I didn't give a shit about the mother or the offspring, but it was the principle of the matter. And I don't care if you're human or a nasty mutant snot-faced wood booger, you can take care of your people. And what he did would never fly in my world, and I was about to painfully end his. When I stood up, he saw me, and he knew he was made. Coming out of the all-4 position was like lightning, and he was in motion in a fraction of a second. I put 2 rounds into his gut. That stopped him for a few seconds, but before he could make another charge, I took out both shoulders at the joint. The Squatch was hurting, but he could walk, and on he came. I started moving to my left. He had 30 yards to go, and even without his arms, he would mutilate me if he could get to me. I was going to inflict as much pain as I could before I let him die. Still, I kept moving, now at a sideways jog, never taking my scope off his main body mass. He was turning to intersect me at an angle of approach, just walking now. I guess those .30 caliber rounds do a little damage, and no matter how much adrenaline he was pumping, the pain was coming in waves. 20 yards away now, I was still moving around him in a clockwise position. I sent another round into his left thigh. "Oh, that shit hurts, doesn't it?" I yelled. He roared furiously, and he made a final lunge, and I dove back to his right and covered my head as I heard the tripwire do that telltale zip. It blew that asshole all over the woods, and I was laughing into the dirt, and I began picking leaves out of my mouth. I had enjoyed every minute of that encounter. To date, it has been my favorite kill. "Give us a sit rep, Steve," I heard Lewis's voice in my earpiece. "I'm good," I said. "Do you see any activity on the screen?" "Looks like we got 'em all," they both agreed. "Let's meet up at Hook's SUV and have a drink," I said. "Hook, do you have a bottle in your car?" "Always, brother. We'll see you there." "Hello, Mr. Lilly. How can I direct your call?" The voice came over the satellite phone like maple syrup on a stack of pancakes. "What agent are you?" "Well, I'm at the switchboard, sir. Switchboard operators do not have code names," she said. "You're now Agent Waffle House. How do you like the sound of that?" "What?" she asked, sounding perplexed. "Because I bet you like pancakes, am I right?" "This conversation is weird, Mr. Lilly. Who can I connect you with?" "How about Agent Blue?" I said. "Hey, before you connect me, between you and me, what does Agent Red look like? Is she cute?" There was a pause. Hold for Agent Blue. Lewis stood beside me, shaking his head. "Why you always messing with these folks, Steve? They're going to think you're crazy." "Keeps them on their toes, throws them off. Makes me an enigma. They can't ever figure me out." "Hell, I can't figure you out either," said Hook. "Mr. Lilly, how can I help you?" Agent Blue's cool voice broke in. "We have 18 subjects we need to get out of these woods. 18 heads will be difficult to haul out and back to Memphis. Will you take another body part on this one as proof of kill?" I said in a hopeful tone. I didn't want to mess with Agent Blue today. I was asking for a favor. "An ear from each animal will be fine, Steve. We will need one head for research, though. Good job down there. This is your biggest haul to date. We watched the festivities on the live feed from the sky. Your team handled it better than we thought. You did have a little help from the marijuana growers, and I doubt they're going to be happy most of their booby traps have been used," said Blue. "They did come in handy," I said. "I don't want bad blood between us and the druggies, but the mines were available and I used them to our advantage. On that subject, we have become acquainted with a pair of twins who rightfully own this land, and they've been cheated out of it. Do you think—" Agent Blue cut me off. "We know all about it, Steve. Tell the girls things will be handled in the next 30 days. The property will be returned to them. Everyone will be compensated and made whole, including Mr. Bright. We're hoping they go ahead and sell the place to him, and regarding the SD cards you collected, please ask the Trice twins to give you a copy so that you can forward those to us. They are not obligated to do that, but it would help on our end. Last, we have other agencies looking into the drug sellers there. I don't know where that will go. They seem to have known something was up. This wasn't new information for them. It is out of our hands now." "Okay, then. I'll tell the twins what you've said. You're all right, Agent Blue. Hey, is Agent Red available to talk?" "Have a good day, Mr. Lilly. We will set up a meeting to collect your specimens in the next 48 hours. Stay well, Steve." "Hey, but about Agent Red." The line went dead. "Who is Agent Red?" asked Quilla. "Never mind," I said. I went on to explain what was happening with the land and the SD cards, and the twins couldn't believe how well this worked out, and they thanked me over and over. They didn't care about the land, and they went on to say they would make Jack Bright a good deal on it. Everything had worked out perfectly. There were no injuries and no bad blood between us and the druggies as far as we knew, and we had just made the best payday ever. I decided later that I wouldn't charge Mr. Bright. He was a good man trying to get some work done, and you can't fault a guy for that, and then charge him for something that you were going to do anyway. It took 2 hours to find the dead creatures in the woods, and I collected the one head from that asshole I killed at the end. He had a big scar across his face. I wish I could have mounted his head, but I didn't want that nasty thing staring at me with those evil human eyes every time I walked in my trailer. The twins had stayed with the vehicles while we gathered ears, and when we returned, they looked at the face of the creature in that tote sack. "That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, Steve," said Quilla. "You sure got that right," said Lewis. "Makes it easy to kill 'em," Hook said. "I wonder if I could do it if they had a cute face." Everyone laughed. An hour and a half later, I pulled to the curb in front of the house to return Quilla to her home. We stood in the front yard waiting for Hook and Priscilla to arrive, and we talked. Quilla was full of questions, and Lewis and I answered the questions that we could. She was a nice girl, and had I lived closer to her, I might have asked her out. I'd need to know if she was seeing anyone, but I never cracked the ice. Why bother? I was too busy to maintain a relationship anyway, and I'm just not the type to settle down. I need to be free to move when I want to, but I think Quilla would have said yes if I had asked her for a date. It is a journey I will never know. The noise from Hook's vehicle roared from the stop sign at the end of the street. He looked to be in a hurry. He turned into the drive a little too soon and bounced the rear into the air on the curb. Priscilla immediately jumped out, screaming at Hook through the passenger window. He looked over at us with a shit-eating grin while he rolled that window up, shutting her down. With that, Priscilla rounded the front of the SUV. Hook couldn't get his window up in time to not be hit by the full sonic Route 44 Cherry Coke. The window was finally up, and I could see his face as Priscilla screamed at him through the glass. I don't know what she was saying. I was too busy laughing and watching Hook sit there with his head bowed and Cherry Coke and ice dripping from his head, through his long beard and into his lap. He was a defeated man at that point. "I need to go see about her," said Quilla. "She is high-strung with men, sort of a clinger, and some guys don't like that. I'm assuming Hook just found out about that and said something. Now you fellas drive safe on your way home." On her way inside, she smiled and waved at Hook, who had now rolled his window down. She lifted her shoulders and hands as if to say, "I don't know what to tell you," and she walked inside. We could hear Priscilla screaming from the back of the house. Lewis and I walked over to Hook's window, but he already had his car in gear. "Don't ask," he said. "I'll tell you about it when we get home. I'm not staying here another minute. She might come back out." Lewis was laughing so hard he said he was about to pee on himself. Well, I was the same. Lewis and I stumbled back to my truck and we left. We never caught up with Hook.